The night inside the DSS detention center was unusually quiet. The air was heavy, and the walls seemed to listen to every sound. Nnamdi Kanu sat alone on the small iron bed, weak from days without proper care. His thoughts wandered between hope and fear. He had heard that Donald Trump had spoken again about his release, and deep down, he believed that something might finally change. But in Nigeria's power circles, that single statement had already caused a storm. The door to his cell creaked open suddenly. The sharp sound broke the silence like thunder. Konu looked up slowly, expecting maybe the guard bringing food or water. Instead, he saw 4 DSS officers walk in, their faces dark and hard. They didn't speak at first, they just stared at him like he was a problem that needed to be solved. Then the one in front, taller than the rest, said in a low voice, "So you think Trump can save you?" Before Konu could even respond, the first blow landed on his shoulder. It was strong enough to push him off balance. He tried to steady himself, but another kick came from the side. The men began to shout as they attacked, calling him names and blaming him for making Nigeria look weak. Konu struggled to speak, but they didn't want to hear him. Every time he tried to say a word, another hit came. They dragged him down to the floor and started kicking him in the ribs. His body twisted from the pain. He could taste blood in his mouth, but he refused to scream. He knew that was what they wanted, to see fear in his eyes. But even in that moment of pain, his heart remained strong. He thought of his people, of all those who believed in him. He could not let them break his spirit. The lead officer leaned down close to his face and whispered, "Trump cannot protect you here. This is Nigeria. You belong to us now." Then he hit him again, this time with the metal end of his gun. Konu's head banged against the wall, and for a moment, everything went dark. When he opened his eyes, the room was spinning. He could hear their voices fading in and out. They were laughing now, as if what they had done was a game. One of them said, "Maybe this will make him keep quiet for a while." Another replied, "He should thank us we didn't finish him." Their words floated in the air like smoke. After some time, they finally stopped. They looked at his body lying still on the cold floor. Blood was running from a cut on his forehead. His hands were shaking, but he still tried to push himself up. The officers turned away, pretending not to see him struggling. The tall one looked back and said, "You brought this to yourself. Next time, even Trump will not hear about it." Then they walked out and slammed the door shut. The sound of the lock echoed through the hallway. Silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of pain and anger. Konu lay there, breathing slowly, feeling every wound burn. His body hurt badly, but his mind was clear. He knew why they had done it. The warning from Donald Trump had made Tinubu's government restless. They wanted to show that Nigeria would not bow to anyone, not even to America. And to prove that point, they had chosen to take their anger out on him. Minutes passed, then hours. No one came to check on him. No doctor, no guard, no one. The light in the cell was dim, and the floor was cold beneath his body. He tried to sit up but fell back again. Each breath felt like fire in his chest. He whispered to himself softly, "Biafra must live." It was the only thing that gave him strength in that moment. He thought of his mother's voice, his people's songs, and the faces of those waiting for him outside. He knew that they could beat his body, but they could not touch what was inside him. His spirit was still free. He closed his eyes and tried to pray, asking God for one more chance to speak to his people. Hours later, a guard passed by and looked through the small hole in the door. The man saw Konu lying on the floor but said nothing. He simply walked away. That was the kind of silence that surrounded him, the silence of people too afraid to care. Inside that cold cell, Konu's heart burned with quiet anger. He realized that the real reason for the attack was fear. The government feared what he stood for. They feared his words, his courage, and the way his voice had spread across borders. They feared the way people still shouted his name even after years of detention. They feared that his spirit could not be broken. That night became one of the darkest nights of his life. Every second felt like an hour. His body ached, his head throbbed, but deep inside, something stronger was growing, determination. He told himself, They can hurt me, but they can never stop the truth. When the sun finally rose, its light slipped through the small window at the top of the cell. It touched his bruised face softly. For the first time since the attack, he smiled weakly. It was a painful smile, but it carried meaning. He was still alive. He was still standing in his heart. The DSS had tried to silence him, but instead, they had made his story louder. And as he lay there, watching the faint light grow brighter, he knew that this night would not stay hidden forever. The world would hear what they had done. The truth would find its way out, just as it always did. Before the attack on Nnamdi Kanu, a strong message had already come from the United States. Donald Trump had spoken again about his case, and his words shook Nigeria's political circle. Trump's statement was short, but it carried great power. He said, if Nigeria refuses to release Nnamdi Kanu, there will be consequences. Those words spread fast across news platforms, and everyone began to talk about it. Some believed that Tinubu would listen. Others knew that pride and power often came before reason. In Aso Rock, the message caused tension. Government officials gathered for a late meeting, and the topic on the table was Trump's warning. Tinubu sat quietly as his advisors spoke one after another. Some told him to ignore the message and continue with the case. Others advised that it would be wise to show some respect to America. But Tinubu was not the type to bend easily. He saw Trump's words as an insult. To him, it sounded like an order, and he believed Nigeria should not take orders from anyone. He looked around the room and said, "We will handle our own matters in our own way. This is Nigeria, not America." His tone was firm, and everyone understood what he meant. That was the end of the discussion. The decision was made. They would not release Nnamdi Kanu. In fact, the message made them even more determined to hold him tighter. The news of Tinubu's response did not take long to reach people around Trump. His team began to follow the situation closely. They had been watching how long Konu had been detained without a fair trial, and they believed it was wrong. Trump's statement came from frustration, but it also carried a warning that the world was watching. He believed freedom should not be silenced, and he saw Konu's case as a test of leadership in Africa. Back in Nigeria, the DSS took Trump's warning personally. To them, it was a challenge to their power. They wanted to prove that no foreign leader could tell them what to do. They started giving stricter orders about how Konu should be handled. They limited his access to medical care and made his conditions harder. One senior officer told his men, "Let him see that America cannot save him." That mindset soon led to the night of the brutal attack. As Konu lay bleeding in his cell after the assault, the message from Trump echoed like a curse over those who had ignored it. Word about what happened inside the detention center began to leak out through quiet whispers. A few insiders could not keep silent anymore. They told close friends about the attack, and those friends passed it on. Within days, the news reached international journalists. Donald Trump was in Florida when one of his aides handed him a printed report. It said that Konu had been beaten in DSS custody just days after the warning. Trump read it in silence for a few moments. Then he looked up and said, "I told them. I told them this would happen if they played with fire." He was angry, but it was not the kind of anger that fades quickly. He felt disrespected, and he wanted to respond. He later made another statement that was even stronger than the first one. "If anything happens to that man, Nigeria will face me directly," he said. No leader should harm a man just because he speaks the truth. Nnamdi Kanu must be released or they will regret their actions. His words were everywhere again, on television, online, and across African media. People began to talk about it across Nigeria. Some praised Trump for speaking up. Others said he was interfering in another country's matters. But no one could deny that his voice carried weight. Even those who disliked him knew that his statements could not be ignored easily. Inside Aso Rock, Tinubu was briefed again. His advisors told him that the American government might take action if the situation worsened. Tinubu did not like that. He was under pressure from every side, from within his government, from Nigerians demanding justice, and from the international community. Yet, he refused to release Konu. To him, giving in to Trump's warning would make him look weak. He wanted to prove that Nigeria was not a puppet of the West. As the tension grew, Nigerian citizens began to wonder what would happen next. Social media was full of discussions about Trump's warning. Some people believed it might finally bring Konu home, while others feared it might make things worse for him. Across the country, people whispered in markets and offices, "Will Tinubu listen, or will he fight back?" Meanwhile, Trump's words continued to echo far beyond Nigeria. They reached Europe, Asia, and other African nations. Many leaders began to watch the situation closely. They understood that this was no longer just about one man. It had become a global issue, a test between power and justice. The DSS continued their usual routine, pretending nothing had happened. But even inside their ranks, some officers were uneasy. They knew the attack had gone too far. One of them quietly said to another, "The world is watching us now. This will not end well." In those tense days, the truth started to move quietly through the cracks of fear. International human rights groups began to collect reports and prepare official letters. They demanded answers about Konu's condition and why he was still being held. The Nigerian government tried to control the story, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Trump's warning had lit a fire that no one could put out. His words had made the case global. Every move Nigeria made was now under a microscope. Every decision would have consequences. And even though Tinubu stood firm publicly, he knew that Trump's shadow now loomed over every discussion about Nnamdi Kanu. What started as a simple warning had now turned into an international spotlight. The world was watching, waiting, and wondering how far Nigeria would go to prove its power, and how much longer Nnamdi Kanu could endure the cost of that pride. When the news of the attack on Nnamdi Kanu reached Kenya, it spread quickly through social media and news platforms. Many people could not believe it. The story was simple but painful. Konu had been beaten again inside detention, just days after Donald Trump had warned Nigeria to release him. The story soon reached the ears of Kenya's president, William Ruto. He was in a meeting when one of his advisors handed him a written report. As he read through it, his face changed slowly from calm to anger. He looked up and said, "This is not right. They promised to treat him well. How can they still do this?" Ruto had always followed Konu's story closely. He knew how Konu had once been taken from Kenya in a secret operation years ago. That event had caused great embarrassment to Kenya, and it had drawn criticism from human rights groups. Since then, Ruto had been careful whenever the issue came up. But now, hearing that the same man had been beaten again in detention, he could not stay silent. He stood up and told his team, "This is madness. They are playing with fire." His words were firm. He believed that what was happening in Nigeria had gone beyond politics. It was now about basic human rights and respect for life. He knew that Trump's warning was already putting pressure on Tinubu's government, and this attack would only make things worse. That same evening, Ruto called for an emergency meeting with his foreign affairs advisors. They discussed the report and how Kenya should respond. Some advisors told him to stay quiet and avoid conflict with Nigeria. They reminded him that Nigeria was one of Africa's biggest powers, and an open confrontation could cause diplomatic tension. But Ruto shook his head. "No," he said. "We cannot hide behind silence when a man is being tortured. We were silent once, and that silence cost us our dignity. Not again." The next morning, Ruto spoke to the press in Nairobi. His statement was calm, but every word carried weight. He said, "If Nigeria cannot protect Nnamdi Kanu, then something is wrong. Leadership means justice, not fear. You do not silence a man's voice by beating him. You do not prove your strength by breaking a prisoner's bones." The reporters listened quietly. Some of them had never seen Ruto so serious before. He continued, "Konu is not a criminal. He is a man with a cause, and even if you disagree with him, you must still treat him with respect. Every African leader should remember that one day, history will judge us all. We must choose justice over politics." His words were soon broadcast across Africa. Within hours, television stations in South Africa, Ghana, Uganda, and other countries began to replay his statement. On social media, hashtags like #RutoSpeaks and #JusticeForKonu began to trend. Many Africans praised Ruto for speaking the truth openly. They said he had shown courage where others had kept quiet. In Nigeria, Ruto's words reached the government immediately. Inside Aso Rock, some officials dismissed his statement as foreign interference, but others were worried. They knew that when another African president spoke out publicly, it meant the issue was growing larger than before. One advisor told Tinubu, "Sir, this matter is getting out of hand. The world is not buying our silence anymore." Tinubu simply frowned and said nothing. Meanwhile, Ruto's message continued to spread. International news outlets like CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera picked it up. They began to discuss the attack on Konu and how African leaders were reacting. The story was no longer just between Nigeria and America. Now it was between Nigeria and Africa. Ruto had made it an African issue. Later that night, Ruto spoke again during an interview on national television. The interviewer asked him why he had chosen to speak out so boldly. Ruto looked directly into the camera and said, "Because silence is weakness. When a leader watches another man suffer and says nothing, that leader becomes part of the problem. Africa must stand for justice, not fear." He then added a line that would later be repeated across the continent: "If Nigeria keeps hurting Nnamdi Kanu, then they are hurting every African who believes in freedom." Those words became a symbol of resistance. People began to share them on posters, banners, and online messages. In the streets of Nairobi, some young people even held peaceful demonstrations, calling for Nigeria to free Konu. Across Africa, other leaders started to react too. Some gave mild statements about human rights. Others avoided the subject completely. But everyone knew that Ruto's bold words had changed the tone of the conversation. What Nigeria thought would stay hidden inside a prison cell had now become a matter of global discussion. Inside the DSS detention center, Konu had not yet been told about Ruto's speech. But when one of the guards secretly whispered to him that Kenya's president had spoken up for him, he smiled weakly. It gave him new strength. He said softly, "God uses anyone he wants. The truth will always speak." Back in Kenya, Ruto faced mixed reactions. Some people praised him for his courage, while others said he should not get involved in another country's problems. But he didn't care. He knew deep down that leadership was not about staying safe, it was about doing what was right. He told his team, "Today it's Konu, tomorrow it could be someone else. If we don't stand for justice now, who will stand for us when our time comes?" Ruto's stand created ripples far beyond Africa. Human rights organizations in Europe and America started calling for investigations into Konu's condition. Some even demanded that the United Nations send a special envoy to Nigeria to check on him. By the end of the week, Nigeria was under heavy pressure from both inside and outside. The people were restless, the media was loud, and foreign governments were beginning to speak. All of this started with a single warning from Donald Trump, but it was William Ruto's bold reaction that turned the issue into a continental demand for justice. And as the days passed, it became clear that the fight for Nnamdi Kanu was no longer his alone. It had become a symbol of freedom for many Africans who believed that truth must never be silenced, no matter who tries to bury it.